Can you see the screen? Hello? Okay. So yesterday afternoon we were discussing about the scheduling algorithms in module 5, and a few more algorithms are left. Very small algorithms. Just an introduction to these algorithms is enough. So with that, we will come to the end of that module. So let me start. Are you ready? Shall I start? Hello. Okay. So the sixth algorithm, rate monotonic scheduling algorithm. So in short, we call it as RMS. Now in this algorithm, the priority P of each task is computed based on the rate of occurrence of the task. That is, a task that occurs several times is given the highest priority. And if that particular task, the task which has the highest priority arrives, then that task will be executed. So RMS, this algorithm, it computes the priority P based on the rate of occurrences of the task. That is, the task with the higher rate of occurrence is given the highest priority or the highest precedence. A task that occurs frequently is given the highest precedence. So what happens is that if a critical task arrives only with great big time gaps, then that may not get precedence. Even though it is a critical task, but if it is not occurring frequently, then it may not get a priority. So it may have less precedence over other tasks. So that is the disadvantage of rate monotonic algorithm, scheduling algorithm. So, and also it does not support aperiodic and sporadic tasks. Aperiodic tasks are those tasks that do not occur within a specific time interval, and sporadic tasks, they are those tasks which occurs whenever an event occurs. And whenever an event occurs, this task keeps on occurring, but later it may not happen. So such tasks are not given precedence, they are not considered in rate monotonic scheduling. Also, the second disadvantage, which I said earlier, that is a critical task that has long periods will be assigned least priority. Even though it is a critical task, it may not, suppose if it is not occurring frequently, or if it has long periods of occurrence, then it will be given least priority. That is all about rate monotonic. That is, the priority is assigned based on the rate at which an event occurs. In summary, we can say that a priority of an event is based on the rate at which an event occurs. The higher the rate of occurrence, the higher will be the priority. That is rate monotonic scheduling. Is it clear to you? Is it clear to you? Hello? Hope you can hear me. So next we are going to the seventh model, that is fixed static real-time schedule, fixed or static real-time scheduling model. That is the priority is always fixed. The scheduler fixes the priority in advance, and to fix the priority in advance, the scheduler must know that the time at which it occurs, the interrupt latency for these tasks, and also its deadline. Its deadline should be known. The time at which it occurs should be known. Only then the scheduler can apply this algorithm, that is fixed or static real-time scheduling model or scheduling algorithm. Here, the scheduler is said to be using a fixed time scheduling method. That is, always the scheduling time is fixed. And also we call it as static. And for it to be static, it should be deterministic. Deterministic means all these parameters such as the deadline, the time at which it should meet the deadline, the interrupt latency, etc. should be known in advance. Only if it is deterministic, then this algorithm can be used. So once the schedule is defined, it remains static. So once everything is assigned to the task, if it knows the schedule at which it occurs, then the static scheduling remains the same. And schedules are deterministic since the latencies for all interrupts and tasks are predetermined. The latencies for the interrupts as well as the tasks, and also if the deadline is known in advance, then fixed scheduling can be applied so that it will never miss the deadline. The task that needs to meet its deadline first will be scheduled first, and that which has a longer deadline will be scheduled later. So based on the deadline, the tasks are scheduled, and this scheduling is always fixed. So here, what the advantage is no deadline miss advantage is one of the main uses of this algorithm. Since the deadlines are known in advance, the scheduler can fix the time at which each task should execute. So there is no missing of deadlines, and that is one of the advantages. But it can be applied only in deterministic situations. That is the drawback. Only if we know that the deadline, only if we know the interrupt latency period, we can determine the task that needs to be executed, or we can determine the order in which the task needs to be executed. And so it can be applied only in deterministic situations. Also, the time or the execution time of the task should not vary under different input conditions. Always the execution time, depending on the inputs and other conditions, it should be fixed. Only if the execution time is fixed, only if the deadlines are known in advance, then this algorithm can be applied. And that is fixed or static real-time scheduling model. Now, this fixed or static scheduling model, it applies three methods for defining the fixed times for its tasks. So fixed schedulers can be defined by one of the three methods. Three methods are used to define the fixed time scheduling. That one is simulated annealing method. Simulated annealing. In this method, different schedules can be fixed. The scheduler will assign different schedules, and it will then check to see if all these deadlines for the task are met. If it is not met, or if it can be done in a better way, it will gradually increment the interrupt time, and then again it will check if it gives a better performance. So it is by varying the time, the time at which the deadlines are met is simulated, and finally the best one is chosen, and that is simulated annealing. So this is how the algorithm fixes the time period. So in this method, different schedules can be fixed, and their performance they get simulated. Then the schedules for the tasks are gradually incremented, and then again this is incremented by changing the interrupt time, and then again the simulation results are evaluated. So the result which shows the best one will be taken as will be fixed for scheduling. So looking at different inputs, simulating the various input interrupt time, and then finding out how they are being processed, whether they are meeting the deadline, and the one that meets the deadline in a better way will be fixed. The next method is heuristic method. Heuristic method means reasoning from past experience based on some past experience, or based on some tasks, by noting the occurrences of tasks earlier in some products, we are going to fix the execution time. So in this method, reasoning or past experience helps to define and fix the schedules. So in fixed scheduling, there are three methods to fix the schedules. One is simulated annealing method, the second is heuristic method, and the third is dynamic programming method. Dynamic programming method. Here, this will run first. The model, in this model, a specific running program will first determine the schedule for each task. And then the timer interrupts, loads the timer settings from the output obtained on running the program. So one extra program, it checks to see if all the deadlines have been met. If some of them are missed, again, it reloads the timer again and again it checks. And this is called, there is a, while the tasks are in execution, different timer settings are used to check if the deadlines are met. That is dynamic programming model. An example in simple software design, a software design which may be such that the priorities can be scheduled and the fixed based on fixed time, and then when there is an error, the schedule can be changed. In software design, we often do that. That is, after designing and when after implementing the system, once an error is identified in the system, we have to go back and then change the design. So while the system is in execution, we are going to change the design, and that is known as dynamic programming model. So that is in fixed scheduling. The seventh method was fixed scheduling. So in fixed scheduling, to fix the schedules, we had three methods. One is simulated annealing method. The second is heuristic method. And the third is dynamic programming method. Now the eighth scheduling is scheduling of tasks that are periodic, sporadic, and aperiodic tasks. So here, in these tasks, the latencies and deadlines are used as performance metrics. In these three tasks, these are different kinds of tasks. One is periodic task, sporadic task, and aperiodic task. The performance metrics is based on latencies and deadlines. As we have said earlier, based on latencies and deadline, all these tasks are scheduled. They are used as performance metrics, and it computes the metrics for each task in scheduling periodic, sporadic, and aperiodic tasks. So let us look at what a periodic task is. A periodic task is one in which period of occurrence is known in advance. That is, if a particular task occurs at 5th millisecond, and we know that again it will occur at 12th millisecond, then we know the task occurrence time. So that is known as periodic task. Then aperiodic task is one in which the period of occurrence is not known, since it may not be, we doesn't know when that particular event occurs. For example, we can tap a key on the keyboard, and it is a random process, so we doesn't know when this event will occur. So a typical example in real life is an event of receiving a phone call, dialing or receiving a phone call. It can be a random process, and so those events that occur at random, they are known as aperiodic tasks. Then sporadic tasks, these tasks has periods of burst when an event occurs. Only when a particular event occurs, these tasks starts its execution, and such tasks are called sporadic tasks. So these are the three tasks, and these tasks to schedule these tasks, we use two performance metrics, that is latency and deadline. Now, how do you compute the latencies or the performance metrics for these tasks? We can compute three different performance metrics using latencies and deadlines. The first method is the ratio of sum of interrupt latencies with respect to sum of execution time. And here we have studied this method earlier. In the first three models, we had written a formula for T-worst, finding the worst case time. By taking the T total plus T ISR. T worst is equal to T total plus T ISR. T total is the sum of execution times of all the tasks that are waiting in the queue. And it includes the time, it is the sum of the time at which a task has arrived in the queue, plus the context switching time, plus the execution time. And that gives the total time for executing a single task. When you sum all the tasks, then you get T total. And to compute T worst, it is equal to T total plus time taken to execute the ISRs, T ISR. So that formula has to be written here also. for computing the latencies. Hello? Am I audible to you? Okay. So I had given written this formula earlier. Let me show you. It's here. See this T worst. This is what I said now. T worst is the sum of the execution time for each task. Task 1, task 2, etc. Task n minus 1 plus n. And that is the sum is denoted as T total, and the sum of all execution times of all ISRs denoted as T as ISR, and T worst is equal to T total plus T ISR. So that formula has to be written here also. Now, next is CPU load as performance metrics. Next, you're computing CPU load to find out if the system performance is better. So each task gives a load to CPU, and to compute the task load, the load given to the CPU, that is CPU load is equal to task execution time by task period. CPU load is task execution time by task period, and CPU load is also called system load. So just remember this formula: CPU load is equal to task execution time by task period, and the CPU load is also called system load. So if the task period is 172 microsecond, and if it is and if it executes for the whole of the time, it is not getting blocked. Once a task is initiated and it needs 172 microseconds, and it is executing for the whole 172 microseconds, and it completes its execution, then the CPU was working on that process, on that task till for 172 microseconds. So the CPU load is the task execution time, that is 172 microsecond by task period. It executes for 172 microseconds. So 172 by 172, you get 1, and 1 means 100%. Okay, the maximum load is 100%. And usually the maximum is 100, and it can be less than that because it may not execute for the whole time. So the execution time may vary. Sometimes it may get blocked, so execution time may vary than the task period. So this may the fraction, the numerator may be less. So it may be less than 1. So the percentage will be, the maximum percentage that can be is 100%. As you know, when the numerator is less, this may vary, the execution time may vary. So it will, the ratio will be less than 1. So the maximum percentage is 1, and that is 100%. Then next is CPU load for multitasking. Now, if there are multiple tasks, then the sum of the CPU loads will be for all the tasks, and ISR should be considered, and that should be less than 1. If there are multiple tasks running, then we have to consider the sum of all the CPU loads. Now here I have stated it once again, that a task that runs once is aperiodic, and what is aperiodic, what is sporadic, etc. is stated here also. The task that executes at variable time gaps is called sporadic. An example of a sporadic task is packets arriving from the router in a network. Now, when a preemptive scheduling is done for these tasks, all these tasks should be considered separately. That is, a periodic task needs to be preempted only once, because it may occur only frequently. It may not occur frequently, but periodic tasks, they need to be preempted after fixed periods, and sporadic tasks, they need to be checked for preemption after a minimum period of occurrence of a particular event. So, usually the software designers, they keep CPU load between 0.7 to 1.25. This is the maximum, the load range of CPU. And for better performance, the CPU load should be between 0.7 to 0.7 plus or minus 0.25. That is from 67.5% to 75.5% is the usual load that the designers check for. Now this is a sporadic task model. For a sporadic model, we use this formula, that is to compute the worst case latency. You have the execution time E into T total by T average divided by E into T total by T minimum, the minimum time taken for executing the task. So just study this formula. Okay. The worst case execution time performance metrics for a sporadic task is calculated as P, and it is denote the worst case the execution time is P worst. It is equal to E into T total by T average divided by E into T total by T minimum. Or I can write this formula, the first line formula. Instead of writing like this, you can write in this way also. So whichever is easier for you, it's easy to remember, you write it like that. That is the worst case execution time, the performance matrix P worst is equal to execution time of the task E into T total by T average. T total is the time taken for executing all the tasks, and this is the average time taken for executing all the tasks. And T again here, this is also T total. Below also it is T total by T minimum. So this shows the total T total by T average is the average rate of occurrence of the sporadic events, and T total by T minimum is the minimum rate of occurrence of sporadic task burst. That is the minimum time within which the task can occur. And T total, this is the average time of occurrence after considering all the sporadic tasks. The period at which the sporadic task has occurred, you are taking the average of all. Here, this is the minimum time between the occurrence of the task. That is, the time gap between each occurrence is denoted by this value T total by T minimum. So this is how you compute the formula for the sporadic task, finding the worst case latencies for sporadic tasks. So you have to just study this formula, and if a question is asked, only 3 marks question will be there from the last sections, CPU load, etc. After these, from 6th scheduling onwards, from rate monotonic scheduling onwards, you have 6, 7, 8 scheduling models. All these you can expect just 3 or 4 marks questions. Is it clear to you? Hello? Okay, so the essay question will be from the first part of the module, okay? Is it clear? Essay question will be from any one of the first 1 or 2 models from first part, that is from the cyclic, round robin, etc., which we had discussed earlier. Let me take that. See, in this page, the first page, I had listed all the scheduling algorithms. The first 4 algorithms, they can be asked as essay questions, and the remaining from 5 to etc. 9 can be used as 3 or 4 marks questions. Did you note that? Did you note that? Okay. So with this, we come to the end of module 5. Any doubt in this module? If you have any doubt, you can ask. Any doubt in that module? Okay, thank you. If you have any doubt while you are studying, just ask me, okay? Either on WhatsApp or by phone call. Anyway, if you have any doubt, just ask. Is it clear? So I'm just going to the introduction of module 6, just an introduction. So this is module 6. I will change this, written module 5. So module 6. So in module 6, we have 2 sections to study. One is networks for embedded systems. Networks, and the second section is networks for, first section is networks for distributed embedded systems. And the second section is the EDLC, that one of the sure question for exam, that is embedded system development life cycle. You might have studied life cycle models in software engineering, isn't it? Can you name any one of these software engineering life cycle models? Any one model, software engineering life cycle model. Anyone? Yes, very good. Waterfall model. Again, here also we have to go through how embedded systems are developed using waterfall model. Apart from that, there is a general life cycle model for embedded products alone. So that life cycle model we have to study first. There are around 9 phases for that model, and you have to study the 9 phases along with its diagram. And then next we have to study how waterfall model or spiral model, etc., can be used for embedded systems. So that is the second section. So in this, in module 6, the first part is about distributed embedded networks for distributed embedded systems. And the second part is about the life cycle models, embedded system life cycle models, EDLC. Is it clear? Is it clear to you? Okay, what is the first section in module 6? What is the first section in module 6? You forgot? Embedded system. What is the TDS? Ashwini. First section is about networks for distributed embedded systems. We are concerned about distributed systems, not standalone systems, but network embedded systems that are distributed far away, or they can be even near also. But it's okay. It's okay. Distributed embedded systems, that is, instead of a single unit, there are several units communicating with each other to perform a specific functionality, and that is distributed embedded systems. And first section we deal with networks for distributed system. What are the different networks that we can use for distributed embedded systems? There you have to study one example network along with its figure. And the second part is about the life cycle model of embedded systems, that is the embedded system development life cycle. These are the 2 sections we have to study. So let me give you an introduction about the first section, that is networks for distributed embedded systems. So in distributed embedded systems, there are several elements communicating with each other, and we call each of these elements as processing elements. So distributed means there will be several units at different places, or maybe they are near but connected via a network. But the elements that contribute to this network, they are named as processing elements, or PEs. So later on, we will use the term PEs only, processing elements. These processing elements, they will be communicating with each other through a network. That is, they are able to speak the network protocol. They are able to understand the network protocol. So they are able to communicate with each other by sending and receiving messages. And such elements in a distributed system, we call it as a processing element. Now, these processing elements, they are connected by a network. and this network allows them to communicate with each other. So in distributed embedded systems, there are several processing elements and they are connected by a network which allows these processing elements to communicate with each other. Is it clear? Is it clear to you? And these processing elements, they can be devices that are connected in a network. And the application is distributed over these processing elements, and some of the work is done at some of in different nodes. Now the work is shared among different nodes. Each processing element has its own function to do, and they are communicating with each other. So this forms a network, and when it is embedded, when we are focusing on embedded systems, we call it as distributed embedded systems, networks for distributed embedded systems. And there are different networks. We have given specific networks for embedded systems. Now, next is reasons for building networks, network-based embedded system. Why do we want to build embedded systems in a distributed way? That is, why do we need a network for building embedded systems? Now, these are the advantages of using network-based embedded systems. That is, to put some computing power near where the event occurs. That is, if there is an event occurring in a system, and if the processing is done at a different location, then it will take, there will be delay in communication. So to put the computing power where the event has occurred, then we have to use distributed networks. Then next is data reduction. The data reduction is instead of taking the raw data, it is reduced, or some processing is done on the data, and then the processed data is passed to the embedded system. Otherwise, huge amount of data, to process huge amount of data, the embedded system may find it difficult. So we use another processing element, and this processing element will reduce the size of the data, and after reducing the size, it will give to the embedded system. So again, there is a need for communication between two devices. And whenever a communication occurs between two devices, we say that a network has been established. Isn't it? Network is the communication between two or more devices. So if we want to get better performance, then we have to process the data and then reduce its size so that only the embedded system is able to process the reduced data, and it will reduce the volume so that it will not take much time to process the data. So it is mostly happening in embedded system, where a typical example is in digital cameras, where the captured image is of huge size, and then we process it and then convert it into a reduced size image. But the difference is digital camera, it is not a distributed system since it is a single unit. But if the capturing process is done by another unit, then we say that it is a distributed system. Then modularity. Modularity is for assembling. See, since we are speaking about distributed system, we can assemble a product from existing components. So several components can be assembled together to form a single product or a single application. In that case, all these individual components that we have assembled should be put together, and they should communicate with each other. So in that case, each unit has its own function to do, and it will provide, it will take input and it will provide some output to the other device, and this results in modularity of the system. That is, each function is specific to a particular unit and doesn't interfere with other units. So in that case, we can establish a modular system since each module performs its own functions. Then we can build fault tolerance into the system. That is, you can substitute a device for another device, and if there is any problem or any device is not functioning properly, then we can test the system using other devices. If it is a single system, then the entire system will fail. But if it is a modular system, the module that is not functioning can be removed and it can be substituted by another module. So we can build fault tolerance into the system. And these are the 4 reasons for studying network-based embedded systems. This can be a 3 marks question, okay? Reasons for studying network-based embedded systems. So this is the architecture. We'll come to it later. Is it clear to you? Hello? Okay. Now you may see your attendance. Number 1. Number 2. 5. 6. 7. 8. 9. 11. 12. 13. 14. 16. Number 16. Okay. Number 17. 18. 20. 22. Sharad. 22. Sharad absent. Sarga. Okay. 24. 26. 27. 28. Okay. 29. 30. 30. Number 30. Amrita. Amrita. Ashwati. Didina. Okay. Harita. Amal Santosh. Okay. So Sharad PV is absent, isn't it? Okay. Okay. Thank you.